Welcome to another episode where we look at history and culture through the lens of beer. You won't believe the story we dug up for you today. It involves a Roman emperor, a rebellion, and a really strange insult. Something about a beer man.
That's right, a Sabiarius, to be exact. And this little word reveals some fascinating things about the Roman Empire in the 4th century CE.
We dug into a scholarly article called Sabiarius, Beer, Wine, and Ammianus Marcellinus by Denis Dino. And trust me, it's packed with surprises.
This seemingly simple insult actually exposes some deep anxieties within Roman society, particularly about who was considered truly Roman and who was seen as an outsider.
So let's set the scene. It's the year 365 CE, and there's a rebellion going on in Asia Minor. A guy named Procopius is challenging Emperor Valens for the throne.
Valens is besieging the city of Chalcedon, trying to crush the rebellion. And this is where the story gets interesting. The defenders of Chalcedon who support Procopius, they start taunting Valens from the city walls.
But they're not just yelling any old insults, are they?
No, they're not. They keep shouting this one specific word at him, Sabiarius.
Now, if you were a Roman in the 4th century, would that be fighting words?
Absolutely. It literally means beer man or beer drinker, and it was meant as a direct jab at Valens's background.
So why was being called a beer man such a big deal? It sounds pretty harmless to me.
Well, in the Roman Empire, beer was considered the drink of the poor and the barbarians. It was associated with the people outside the Roman world, the uncivilized folks up north. Wine, on the other hand, was the drink of the elite, the mark of Roman sophistication.
So calling Valens a beer man was a way of saying he was low-class and uncultured, basically the opposite of what a Roman emperor should be.
Exactly. It was a way of undermining his authority and legitimacy as emperor.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The article points out that Valens himself was actually of Illyrian origin.
His father was from Pannonia, which was part of Illyricum, a region where beer was the common drink. Ammianus Marcellinus, the historian who recorded all of this, even describes Valens as having a pot belly, maybe a subtle hint at his supposed beer-drinking habits.
So the insult wasn't just a random jab, it was a calculated attack on Valens' background, a way of highlighting that he wasn't really one of them, a true Roman.
Exactly. They were basically saying, you're just a barbarian beer drinker not fit to rule us.
You know, this is kind of like those beer commercials you see today, where they try to create a specific image for their product, associating it with ruggedness or sophistication.
Absolutely. It's all about the image and the associations we have with certain drinks. In ancient Rome, your drink of choice said a lot about your social status and your cultural identity.
So by calling Valens a Sabiarius, the rebels were trying to strip him of that elite Roman status and paint him as an outsider.
Right. And they were tapping into existing prejudices within Roman society. There was this idea that people from certain regions, particularly those where beer was popular, were somehow less Roman.
Wow. It's fascinating how a single word can be so loaded with meaning and cultural baggage.
Absolutely. This Sabiarius story shows us that even something as simple as a drink can be used as a weapon to attack individuals and to reinforce social hierarchies.
It makes you wonder what they would have thought about our craft beer obsession today. Would they be horrified or intrigued?
That's a great question. Maybe we'll explore that in another episode.
I'm definitely curious to know more. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's dive deeper into the historical context of this insult. What else was going on in the Roman Empire at the time that might have contributed to the power of this beer man attack?
Well, there was a growing divide between the eastern and western parts of the empire, which is important to understand here.
I vaguely remember that from history class. The Roman Empire eventually split into two around.
That's right. And this division was already starting to emerge in the 4th century.
So how did this east-west divide play into the beer man insult?
The East was more urbanized and cosmopolitan, with a long tradition of wine drinking, while the West was seen as more rural and militaristic, and you guessed it, beer was more common there.
So Valens, being from Illyricum in the West, was seen as representing that rougher, less civilized side of the empire.
Exactly. And the insult Sabiarius played on this East-West divide, tapping into the prejudices that many Eastern Romans held against those from the Western provinces.
So it wasn't just about beer then. It was about geography and cultural identity as well.
Precisely. The insult highlighted the tensions that were already simmering beneath the surface of Roman society. These anxieties about who was truly Roman and who was considered an outsider.
Wow, this beer man insult is turning out to be a real window into the complexities of the Roman world.
It really is, and we've only just scratched the surface.
This is getting really interesting. But before we move on, I want to take a moment to appreciate the historian who recorded all of this, Ammianus Marcellinus.
He's quite a character, a Roman soldier and a staunch traditionalist who wasn't afraid to criticize those in power.
I have a feeling he might have had some strong opinions about this whole beer man situation.
Oh, you bet he did. And those opinions might have colored his account of the events.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's unpack Ammianus's perspective and how it might have shaped our understanding of this story.
All right, let's dive in. So Ammianus Marcellinus, he gives us this whole story about the beer man insult, but we have to remember he wasn't exactly a neutral observer.
Yeah, we were just talking about how he might have been a little biased against Valens because of his background.
Right. Ammianus was a Roman soldier and a real stickler for tradition. He believed in the old Roman values, and he saw those values reflected in wine.
Wine was civilized.
Exactly. Sophisticated, moderate, but beer, that was the drink of barbarians.
And Valens being from Illyricum, where beer was pretty popular.
Exactly. Plus, Ammianus describes Valens as having a potbelly. Maybe a subtle dig at his beer drinking habits.
So Ammianus probably wasn't too impressed with Valens to begin with.
No, he wasn't. And on top of that, Ammianus was part of the old Roman aristocracy. And they were losing power to these new guys coming up from places like Pannonia.
Like Valens.
Right. And Ammianus didn't have a lot of good things to say about these Pannonian officials. He thought they were greedy, ambitious, lacking in the traditional Roman virtues.
So he might have been using this beer man insult to make Valens look even worse.
It's definitely possible. Ammianus was a master of subtle insults, little digs here and there. He could have been using this episode to undermine Valens and make him seem less Roman.
So we have to take everything Ammianus says with a grain of salt.
We have to be careful. We can't just accept his version of events without question. But we also can't completely ignore what he says. He was there. He saw what happened.
So how do we know what to believe?
That's the challenge of studying history. We have to look at all the evidence, consider the different perspectives, and try to piece together the most accurate picture we can.
It's like a puzzle.
Exactly. And this beer man insult is just one piece of that puzzle. It tells us about the prejudices of the time, the tensions between different groups.
It shows us how a simple drink can be used as a weapon.
Right. It's not just about what you drink. It's about what your drink says about you, about your status, your culture, your identity.
And those kinds of associations, they don't just disappear overnight.
No, they don't. We still see them today. Think about the way we talk about different types of food or drink.
Like how we might judge someone for drinking cheap beer.
Exactly. Or how we might associate certain drinks with certain lifestyles.
It's fascinating how those kinds of stereotypes can persist for centuries.
It really is.
Okay.
But let's get back to the Romans for a minute. We've talked about how they saw beer, but let's talk about their relationship with wine.
Yeah, the article we're discussing goes into that in some detail. It talks about how the Romans really valued moderation.
Right. Wine was part of daily life for them, but they drank it in small quantities throughout the day.
And it wasn't just about getting drunk. It was about enjoying the taste, the ritual, the social aspect.
Exactly. Wine was a symbol of civilization, of refinement, of connection to their ancestors.
It was part of what made them Roman.
And then you have the people in the north, the Gauls, the Britons. They had a very different relationship with alcohol.
They liked their beer.
They did. And they weren't so concerned with moderation. For them, drinking was about letting loose, bonding with your fellow warriors, celebrating victories.
So it's a very different drinking culture.
Completely different. And the Romans, they looked down on that. They saw the northerners as drunkards, as barbarians.
Which makes this whole beer man insult even more interesting. It wasn't just about calling Valens a beer drinker. It was about saying that he wasn't one of them, that he didn't belong.
And it tapped into these deep-seated anxieties about who was truly Roman and who was a threat to the Roman way of life.
It's amazing how much we can learn from a simple insult, isn't it?
It really is. It shows us that even the smallest details can reveal a lot about a society, about its values, its fears, its prejudices. It's like we're looking back through time at a snapshot of Roman anxieties.
And we're seeing them play out through this insult over drinks.
It makes you think about our own perceptions of different drinks today.
Right, like how we associate certain beverages with certain social groups.
Exactly. Think about it, champagne. It's often seen as a drink for the wealthy, while beer is more for the working class.
It's amazing how those associations have persisted for centuries.
And it's not just about class either. Certain drinks can be associated with specific cultures or nationalities.
Like tequila with Mexico or Guinness with Ireland.
Exactly. And sometimes those associations can lead to stereotypes and prejudices.
Like a modern-day version of that ancient Roman beer prejudice.
You could say that. The specifics might have changed, but the basic idea is the same. We use drinks as a way of categorizing people and
Yeah.
making judgments about them.
So what's the takeaway from all of this? What can we learn from this ancient Roman beer insult?
I think it's a reminder to be aware of our own biases and to question the stereotypes we encounter. Just because something has been associated with a certain group for a long time doesn't mean that association is accurate or fair.
It's a call to be more open-minded and to judge people based on their individual merits, not on their drink preferences.
Well said. It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique story and that we should approach each other with curiosity and respect.
That's a great message to end on. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from the political intrigue of the Roman Empire to the cultural significance of beer.
It's been a fascinating journey.
And we couldn't have done it without you, our listeners. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of history and culture through the lens of beer.
We hope you learned something new and maybe even had a few laughs along the way.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends. We'll be back soon with another adventure into the unexpected corners of the past. Cheers.